When a routine traffic stop evolves into a career-defining moment, a police officer's worst assumptions collide with a truth he never saw coming. The man he's pulling over holds his future in his hands. As the sun began its descent over Sacramento's streets, painting the sky with amber and gold streaks, Eric Porter was heading home after a long day at the office. His sedan hummed softly as he adjusted the air conditioning, eager to shake off the day's stress. The radio played faintly in the background, offering a soothing antidote to the hustle and bustle of the city streets. He approached a yellow light, slowing just in time as it turned red. That's when the blue and red lights flared behind him, the sharp blare of a police siren cutting through the air. Eric glanced in his rearview mirror, brow furrowing slightly. He pulled over to the side of the road, rolling down his window as a police cruiser parked behind him. Out stepped Officer Bradley Larsson, a man in his mid-30s with a buzz cut and a badge gleaming on his chest. Larsson adjusted his belt as he swaggered toward the car, exuding the confidence of someone accustomed to being in control. "License and registration," Larsson said curtly, his voice flat but tinged with authority. Eric complied without a word, reaching into the glove compartment for his registration and handing over his driver's license. His movements were calm and deliberate, though he could feel Larsson's gaze scrutinizing him, searching for a reason to dig deeper. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Larsson asked, leaning in closer to the window. "I'm not entirely sure," Eric replied, his tone polite but firm. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Larsson stated, though there was a flicker of hesitation in his voice. Eric frowned slightly but nodded. "I see. I thought I slowed down in time, but I understand." Instead of responding immediately, Larsson narrowed his eyes, studying Eric more closely. The stop had clearly shifted in his mind from routine to something more. His posture subtly changed, as if he had already decided this was more than just a minor infraction. Glancing at Eric's license, Larsson asked, "You're not from around here, are you?" Eric hesitated for only a fraction of a second before answering, "I moved here a few months ago. My address is on the license." But Larsson wasn't really listening. His questions were starting to take on an edge, suggesting that the traffic violation was no longer his main concern. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" Larsson pressed, leaning in closer. "Just going home," Eric replied, his tone steady. But something had shifted in the air. Larsson didn't just see Eric as a driver now, he saw something else. Something that warranted suspicion. Eric could feel the tension building, but didn't flinch. Little did Larsson know, the calm exterior wasn't naivete. It was control. This was just the beginning. Larsson took a step back, folding Eric's documents with exaggerated slowness before tucking them into his chest pocket. Straightening up, his expression shifted into something faintly smug, as though he'd already made up his mind about Eric. "Step out of the car for me," Larsson ordered. Eric's grip on the steering wheel tightened briefly, but his face showed no reaction. "Is there a specific reason for that, officer?" he asked, his tone measured. Larsson's lips twitched, but he masked it quickly. "I asked you to step out. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." The unspoken threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Eric exhaled slowly and opened the door. As he stepped out, Larsson's eyes flicked over him, sizing him up. Eric stood a little taller than the officer, his shoulders broad, but his demeanor unthreatening. His tailored suit suggested professionalism, and his polished shoes spoke of someone meticulous and careful. Yet none of that seemed to matter. "Hands where I can see them," Larsson gestured toward the front of the car. Eric complied, his movements calm. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" Larsson smirked faintly. "Just routine. We've had some incidents around here. You can never be too careful." Eric turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Larsson. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans? Or does this have more to do with something else?" The question landed like a punch. For a moment, Larsson's composure faltered. He straightened up, his hand drifting toward his belt more out of reflex than necessity. "Watch your tone," Larsson said, his voice hardening. "I'm simply asking a question," Eric replied, his tone quiet but firm, unsettling the officer. Larsson leaned in closer, narrowing his eyes. "You seem awfully familiar with how this works." Got something to hide? Eric let the silence stretch before answering, "No, officer. I just believe in being clear about the reasons for an interaction like this. Transparency, you know?" Larsson scoffed but didn't reply. He stepped back, pacing a small circle in front of the car. The dynamic was shifting in ways he couldn't quite grasp. Eric wasn't reacting the way most people would. There was no fear, no stammering, no nervous fidgeting. Just control, poise, and an unsettling calm that put Larsson on edge. "You seem pretty confident," Larsson muttered, almost to himself, "like you think you know what's going to happen next." Eric didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. "Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is." Larsson froze for half a second before turning back to face him, his expression now sharper, almost defensive. He opened his mouth to reply, but the words didn't come out. Eric's composure was throwing him off balance, and he didn't like it. As the silence stretched between them, the tension was electric. Larsson was starting to realize that this wasn't going to play out the way he'd expected. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. The real test was about to begin.